hopefully you can see my my opening slide. I'm not going to sell you anything. This is one of those amazing slides that says, hey, you're going to be given a product presentation. You're not. Instead, we're going to do this. We're going to do security. Hi, I'm Martin Russ. I'm a guy who breaks things. Up until very recently, I was a certified information security professional, which is one of those security qualifications that has an exam that is notorious and takes a long while, and et cetera, and costs a fortune. For nearly 10 years, I was number 2 in security for the rest of the world for a US middle-ranking company. I've always been confused that the Fortune 500 goes more than 500. So number 870, the last time I looked, was the company that I worked for. And there's my email. I don't look at my email very often from that mailbox. You'll understand later why there are 2 eyes staring at you. So, I assume you've already had previously people talk to you about security. There's narrow security and wide security. There's the sort of security that OWASP tends to talk about, which is app security, web security. But there are wider views of security. So I'm going to cover both sort of sets. When people talk about security, they try and frighten you. They try and give you vague threats, and they say there's people out there. And what this tends to lead to is where they're going to try and sell you something. I'm not selling anything. This is all free and there's no selling at the end. I'm going to play the part of a consultant. One of the interesting things about working for a US company that manufactures things and has factories and an R&D department and design people and et cetera, is that you have lots of people who are very, very skilled, very knowledgeable, and they answer back. And so it was very interesting trying to persuade people that actually they needed to make it that security was something that was something they needed to consider and be working with, et cetera. If I was a real consultant, then yes, I'd ask you how you do business, and there's a little bit of that, but I'm not going to give it back to you. And as I said, this is all free, so you get an interview by a consultant all at once, and I do it for free. So whenever you get someone like this and they say, I'd like to talk to you about your business, then they always do some ice-breaking exercises. So I'm still going to do those, even though we're in a strange situation because we're doing it online. So here's the first group exercise. So I very much doubt whether any of you can arrange yourselves into pairs. So what I'd like you to do is think about what your reaction would be if you were in a pair and you were asked to give each of these pieces of information to that other person. So I'll let you think about that. Have a look at what the things that you're being asked to talk about are, or to exchange are. Okay, and so normally that takes a long while. We can do it very quickly. So were you happy about exchanging all that information? Did you think, what's he asking this for? Why is shoe size there, for instance? Did any of you not exchange information? Okay, let's go a bit further then. Supposing these were the pieces of information that you were being asked to exchange with the other person. Okay, and again, were you happy with those? Would you feel okay giving someone else that information? Did you see anything interesting about the information? Any way that it might be usable in some way? Hopefully you're starting to get an uneasy feeling about this. So now the really interesting one. This is where I'm going to ask you to exchange some really personal items. Okay. I'm assuming that very few of you felt comfortable doing that, and that you could think of lots of ways that those items might be used by someone else. When you actually have a physical object and it's yours, like your keys or your credit cards or something, or your wallet, then it tends to be something that you don't consider just handing over to someone else. But people have a very different attitude when it comes to other things, because they know that the world doesn't work that way. So mobile phones and credit cards and personal information are the sort of thing that you look after, and there's systems in place to look after them and so on. And so if you've got IT or cyber or app or cloud, then they're different. And that if you have personal details of your company or secrets, they're going to be held securely in a state-of-the-art IT system. And if you have a network that you use to connect your computers together, the apps on it and all of your data is going to be completely protected. Unfortunately, these are assumptions that lots of people have, and they're not necessarily true. Rather like you don't hand your house keys to someone else and think there's no way they're going to do anything with my house keys or my mobile phone or my credit card with the pin on a post-it note to it. Yeah, people think about these things differently. So sarcasm. I'm going to do some sarcasm here. Actually, none of these is correct. They're all things that people do, and people might like to think that these things don't happen, but they do. So the problem is that security is an interesting problem. People think about security in a different way. So here's another exercise, and this one's interesting. Here's a rival sports car. And what I'd like you to do is just spend a few seconds thinking about how you could mess about with it. Anything is available. It's only a picture of a Bugatti Veyron. It's just a photograph, and so no real cars will be damaged by anything that you think about. So I'll leave you to think about that. Now, if I was a magician, I'd say, here are probably some of the things that you thought about, because these are the sort of things that people give as answers. And a whole set of old classics there. Unfortunately, out there in the world, there are people who see this very differently. And they have things like this as ways of messing with that car. If we're thinking about a company, then most companies are worth more than a car, even a fancy car like that. Unfortunately, organized crime, there's quite a lot of it about. It's organized, hence the name, and it's people who do criminal things. Rivals never ever call in the shadier side of things to influence reality. And the sort of people who do hacking and nasty things like that, unfortunately, they have no morals. They'll do anything. anything wise, there are kids with varying levels of ability, from amazing to completely scary, all over the interweb. It's an interesting sandbox that they can play in. And they do. They play in it a lot. If they do, any of these people manage to get past any security that you have, or no security if you have no security, the sort of things that they'll do are things like this. They'll hack your company website. They'll change things. They'll put different pictures on. They'll change the text. They'll probably post on your Twitter feed. It's very funny when you get a completely different out of character post on your Twitter feed. They'll steal your customer records. Lots of names and addresses, lots of information about what people are interested in, maybe even phone numbers, maybe even passwords, etc., etc. Oops, why does he do that? They might move money from your bank account. They might be more creative with moving money around, and they might subject you to ransomware, which is very distressing, where you suddenly find that your data is encrypted, you can't read it, and you have to pay them money in order to undo the encryption. And there's no real guarantee that they're going to do that. So, the sort of reactions I get from people when I say, have you considered thinking about security, vary. There are lots of different views that people have. It's unusual for someone to welcome you and say, we need security. Although there are people who are like that, and those are the people who've had problems, like on the previous slide. Sometimes I come across managers who are very, very sure they do not need security. And if they did need security, then they would be better at it. And the problem is that lots of people are obviously completely rubbish at these things, and that's why they have problems. It's very interesting talking to people. Here's some of the things I've been told. Lots of people are very sure that they don't need security. Trying to get security onto agendas can be interesting as well. There are people who have lots of techniques for making sure that security never actually happens. None of these things have ever happened to me. Unfortunately, security is one of those interesting things where there are all those hackers, all those kids, all the organized crime, all these people who are looking for routes in, things to do, ways to earn money, etc., etc. And if you are assuming that you're going to be safe from any of their activities, then you're putting off a very bad day at work. So stopping the guy who says you should be thinking about this is actually a disaster waiting to happen. Because, as I say, the bad guys are out to get you, and they do. There's an awful lot of them out there. And so far, you've probably been very lucky. Yeah. Unfortunately, luck only goes so far. So, let's turn a corner and look at something from a different way. Imagine you're being chased by a tiger. There's you and some other people. So once again, well, I don't have a tiger and you don't have any other people immediately to hand, probably. But imagine you're in a group of people and you're being chased by a tiger, a hungry tiger. And the hungry tiger represents all of those bad guys who are out to steal stuff from your company, like your salary, your pension, etc., etc., your profits, your product secrets, your next special promotion, all of those things. The tiger wants to get you, and you're running away from it. So there are various places that you can be in this pack of people who are running away from the tiger. You can be right at the front, you can be somewhere in the middle, or you can be at the back. If you're at the back, you're in a bad position. So at the back, we've got people who are not very aggressive, maybe don't really care about security, and unfortunately the tiger's probably going to get them. At the front, you've got people who are really keen, who spend lots of money on security, worry about it all the time, and they're probably spending too much money on security, and so they're expending too much energy. They're probably screaming as well because they're desperate to get away from that very hungry tiger. And so they're in a really bad position because they're going to get tired first. They're very likely to fall over because they walk into a branch or something, or they slip because they're right at the front. And so that front position seems bad because one way or another, you're very likely to get caught by the tiger. In the middle is interesting because you've got people behind you, so they're going to get got by the tiger. You're spending slightly more than they are on security, so you're using slightly more energy to keep ahead, but you're not doing anything like the fast running, screaming and waving your hands and so on that those people right at the front are doing. So you've got an efficient, cost-effective solution. And you're much more likely to watch one of the guys at the front fall down, you jump over him and the tiger gets him, or one of the guys at the back get eaten by the tiger. So in the middle. So you don't need to go over the top. Careful, cautious, just enough so that the other people go for an easy target. That's what tigers do. They don't want to chase after that guy who's at the front, who's fast. If there's a guy at the back who's struggling, then that's what they'll go for. So let's modernize this and let's bring that car back. So imagine this time that you're in a car, and you could be a startup, so you can all fit inside the car, or maybe you need a coach or two, and it's a huge robot tiger this time. So now the game's changed slightly because we're all in this car, and if the tiger gets to the car and pulls the door open, then we're all in trouble. And so it's one car versus another. So again, we want not necessarily the fastest car, we want one that's going to have somewhere in the middle, and we want slower cars behind it. So we want people to be spending less on security, thinking about it less, and so on. But we don't want people who are going crazy fast because they're going to run out of fuel, etc., because their expenditure is huge. So yes, we want to be somewhere in the middle, and we're all in it together. There's a very, very vested interest here in making sure that it's our car that's in the middle, because that way we're all going to survive. So let's think about what that tiger means. What the tiger means is the opposite, or it's the answer to all of those things that were said right early on in the slides, where people said security is a total waste of time and effort money. Actually, it's not, because the earlier you implement it, the lower the cost. The cost goes up the later you implement it. It's going to happen at some stage. You're going to have a security breach, and they're really nasty things to happen. You can get fines for security breaches, and those are intriguing. They're often against your revenue, not your profit. So they're slightly different to a lot of the things that happen. Security breaches happen a lot. They're very good at ruining brand value, reputation of companies and so on. Subtle breaches might be almost invisible, but they'll then defraud your company of huge amounts of money slowly, almost invisibly, but it can happen. Then there's fixing things. Fixing things can cost lots of money as well. Fixing things afterwards always costs more money. And then there's insurance. How are you going to get insurance afterwards? Because people are going to say, oh, what happened? Oh, right from the start, I did all those things where I got you to think about what you do with keys and credit cards and so on. So you wouldn't do any of these things. Do any of these things happen virtually in any of the IT, the applications, the cloud storage that you use for your company? One of the things people say is security is for losers. Very often the people who are really sure about it say this. Unfortunately, it's likely to be the people who don't think about security who are going to be the losers. So you will lose money, reputation, staff. Staff are interesting. The best will go first, and yes, you then have trouble recruiting staff. It's always interesting what happens when a company gets a major security breach and goes under, because lots of security people come onto the market. And so when you interview them, you say, oh, so where did you work previously? And they're often not very keen on telling you where they worked previously, because it's only just been in the news. And they're not sure what you're going to think of someone who worked in security in a company that's just been breached. Future projects are interesting. If your company depends on something where you want an edge on the competition might well have them. If there's a security breach, your secrets are all sold on. There are hackers who specialize in selling plans of chemical installations, production lines, manufacturing systems to other people. So if you want to make a particular product, you buy a prepackaged extensive set of detailed manuals, plans, etc., from someone who's done it, has gone through all the problems of initializing it, setting it up, maintaining it, etc. If you can get all of that information, you can avoid all of the problems they had and just build a plant to make something, and it'll cost you lots less because you don't have any of the effort of making it. And do you want to be associated with the lack of security? There are some companies who do have this association. Then there's the CV. Very tricky. How do you put, I was one of the people who helped to kill my previous company because we had a security problem and we should have done something about it. Yeah, it's probably not going to get on your CV, is it? One of the things people often say is that no one fails because of a lack of security. And that's because you don't see the failures, you only see the survivors. You see the companies that are still on the net, still details at company house, etc. Something like 1 in 8 companies fails because of security breaches. And the failure can be quick or it can be quite slow. 6 months of hell after a security breach seems like a long time. 6 weeks, yeah. Your valuation can drop because if you are selling something where people expect it to be secure and you've shown that you aren't secure, that can kind of make that initial sales pitch quite tricky. So small businesses, less than 6 months. after a security breach. Interesting that a third of the security breaches are in companies that have less than 250 employees. So these are not the huge companies that make the headlines. There are various, I want to say charts, but charts seems like it's glorifying it. There are places you can go on the web where they show you the biggest security breach so far, and a lot of these tend to be very large Fortune 500 companies. But these are just because they're the names that you've heard of, etc., etc. There's an awful lot of small companies. The hackers, they get some kudos for going for a big company, but small companies, especially those in very specialist areas, they have interesting things that can be sold on. And making money is what all of these hackers, organized crime, even the kids are into, making money out of it. And if we start counting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, then that's 3 security breaches just happened. Some brands have become famous because they've had more than one security breach. And you won't have ever heard of any of the top 20 breached companies of the 21st century. Anyone ever heard of Adobe or eBay or LinkedIn or Marriott International? I didn't even know that MySpace was still going. Yahoo! Interesting. One of the things that happens with a security problem is that there's a sensible way of approaching it and a not so sensible way. Often people put a sticking plaster on it, and they release a press statement that says, we've taken steps to ensure that this can never happen again. What often happens is that then something different happens. And so they then say, we've taken steps to ensure that this can never happen again. Reactive stuff like that is not necessarily the best way of doing things. This is probably the guy at the front of the block of people running away from the tiger. There are all sorts of people that that don't like security breaches, and so the more important thing that people say, insurance is definitely important, but I always think of security as being something where it is insurance. And I like this one. So it says, people tell me that smart people find ways around security. And actually, my understanding is that smart people do have pensions, wear seatbelts, look after themselves, etc., etc., and they usually have insurance. So, yeah. So, let's look at the bottom line. All of this is completely predictable. There's lots of the bad guys out there. They're going to hack you one way or another eventually. It's a bit like cancer. 1 in 2 people is going to have cancer sometime in their lifetime. And if you're a company, then there's this 1 in 8 chance of you being taken down by it and making the company fail. And hopefully you've now got in your mind this picture of running away from a tiger. And it's either you running away from a tiger, or it's you and lots of other people in a coach or a bus or a car and running away from this rather scary robot tiger. If you talk to people about security, then they'll speak in jargon. So that initial conversation where you say to someone, I think we need to be thinking about some security for our company. They will say all sorts of phrases and words that aren't in common usage. So using our car analogy, here's what some of them are. So how's that tiger going to get in the car? Well, it's going to smash the windscreen or pull the door off or whatever. And A security guy, he will call that sort of thing penetration testing. So penetration testing happens when they look at your website, they look at your application, and they see if there are any problems in it. So hopefully your company car is nicely made and it's not easy to open the doors. Tigers do have some difficulty getting into a lot of cars. The who and the how. Who are these people who are going to break into your company, steal everything, get all your secrets, steal all your money, etc., etc.? How are they going to do it? That's where your security guy will talk about something called threat analysis. He'll look at who is likely to want details of this amazing new chocolate bar that you've designed and patented and made all the material to all the machines and so on to make this amazing chocolate bar that's going to take the world by storm. And it's very valuable to hackers to sell to someone else. So that's what threat analysis is. Tire blowout does happen to cars. Suddenly things can go wrong. What's the risk of this happening? Well, it depends on things like how worn your tires are and what sort of surfaces you've been driving on, and etc. And a security guy calls this risk assessment. This is where they look at the way that you do things and they will say, maybe you shouldn't drive on broken stone when you've got your tires very worn down. A backseat driver, that mother-in-law or father-in-law or experienced brother or the sister who knows everything, all of these things. In a company security sense, these are what a security guy would call insider threats. So this is that person who sits there quietly and is siphoning away money, or is getting goods delivered to his address, which he then sells on. MOT testing, yep. MOT testing of a car, yep. The equivalent for that, a security guy will talk about things like red teams. And these are people who will test out how easy it is to do things. So rather than just look at things like penetration testing or threat analysis or risk assessments, there's no real substitute in a lot of cases for actually getting people to try it. And so you get what a security guy will say. He'll say, have you considered a red team? If you didn't know what a red team was, then it's just meaningless jargon. Finally, there's the thing that garages love you to have, which is that service plan. That thing where you pay so much money repeatedly on a subscription so that your car is looked after by the dealer and etc. The security guy will talk about things like a security plan. He'll talk about things like SDL, which means a secure development lifecycle. So this is a way of building in security into the whole life cycle of the development of a piece of software, a website, an application, etc., etc. So this is that whole life, that whole experience, that handing over responsibility for looking after it to someone else. And so, yeah. So those are the major jargons that you'll come across. So we do this. We're in a virtual car. We've got all of the security things covered. We've got this seal of approval from all of the things, and we know that the tiger, this huge robot tiger, is going to get someone further back in the queue in a slightly less well-prepared, slightly cheaper, slightly less security-focused company. So what sort of actions? If we think about being inside the car, then I said we're all in it together when we're in that car, because if the tiger gets in, that's it. So actually security is something that should be owned by everyone from the top all the way down to the bottom, because If your car breaks down, the tiger gets it. If the door comes off, you all got it. If the windscreen smashes and the tiger gets in, oh dear. So definitely, it's something that everyone needs to buy into. Security now will save pain, grief, and money later. Yep, when that tiger gets inside, there's definitely going to be pain, grief, and so on. Cost of security goes up the longer you avoid it. Yeah, the later we set out, and the slower our car, the more we're going to need to push the accelerator and spend effort to get away from those people at the back. Smart companies like security. Yeah, and a little investment in security now keeps you ahead of the tigers. Yeah. There's some information on the OWASP website. Interestingly, all this about if you spend money early, it's better. Did anyone spot that error in the very first slide? It said security for mangas. It didn't say managers. Unfortunately, this is incredibly difficult to fix now because you've all seen the slide. You probably thought he can't spell. This has been recorded, so it's going to be distributed, and people can look at it, which means that that error is going to persist for a long while. And the cost of sorting it out, changing it, redoing the recording, etc., goes up and up. If I'd fixed it right at the beginning, in fact, if I fixed it before we started doing this, it would have been so much better. It's exactly the same with security. The best time to fix the security of a website, of an application, of a piece of software is when you're very first thinking about it. That's when you first need to think, shouldn't we be thinking about security? So that's what it should have looked like. Managers. Interesting. What does security for managers mean? It means exactly what it says. It gives management security. It's like an insurance policy. If you've got no nightmares, you know that you're safe from the tigers. You know that your company secrets are not going to be sold to someone else. You know that someone isn't siphoning money away and spending it on, well, gambling or a Netflix subscription or whatever, chocolate, all sorts of things that people spend things like that on. So yes, it's an insurance policy. It's a way of sleeping well at night. So actually, that initial slide should have looked like this. It should have said, you should think about IT, application, or cloud security, or all three, because it's going to help you in lots of ways. On the LinkedIn, there was a very useful picture, which I thought was rather good, where it's one of those pictures that you have to look at and think about. But yes, how many times have you seen premises where it says protected by security such and such, and there's graffiti and stuff all over it? Yeah, interesting thought. And the big takeaway from this, the thing that's going to stay in your mind for quite a while, I'm afraid, is the thought of that huge robot tiger. I should have had a small person somewhere actually on this slide, but yes, it's the huge robot tiger that's out there to get you. And the way to stop him doing that is to make sure that you aren't one of those people at the back of the pack. Oh yeah, right. So that was what I was going to say. I'll open up to people. So I'll unmute. Oh, I can only mute everyone. How do I unmute everyone?
I think they have to unmute themselves.
Oh dear, you have to unmute yourself. Right, well here's another group exercise then. Yes, can you unmute yourself? Right, I noticed we had 3 questions.
Oh, that was just me some typing some stuff there. Has anyone got any questions? I've got some if no one else has. People are still trying to work out.
You can ask me. I'm not shockable.
Well, from my experience, the main issue I've had with all the companies I've worked at is getting buy-in from the business itself.
Yep.
I mean, to get them to have a cybersecurity practice or a team, maybe it's just part time, a couple
Yeah.
of people whose job it is, and they just see it as a cost. I mean, I've had meetings with various people. Apologize for my cough.
Yep.
And they've said, actually, no, we'd rather just spend the money on development and take the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially with GDPR and all that now, they could be massively fined.
Yeah.
And it's become, especially for like the R&D projects, it's become like a tick box exercise where they will actually outsource it, and they will pay a small fee to another company just to check them over and make sure they're okay. One of the things that happened in 2014 was the government said, well, if you want to start working with us, you need to prove that you are, aware of cybersecurity. And
Yeah.
so they create something called Cyber Essentials.
Yeah.
So that's done by the NCSC, and
Yeah.
basically it's like two levels. One is like 300 quid plus VAT, and you do your own assessment, send it in, someone verifies it and ticks it off, and then you can put, Cyber Essentials tick box on your website.
Yep.
And then the second level, a bit more money, where third party tests. So it's kind of a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But it's still, I found it
Look,
really hard.
any step you take is going to take you further away from the tiger. That's the thing. It's when you don't do anything that you're likely to get slashed by the tiger. So yes, anything is better than nothing. And as you've seen from the thinking about the car and so on, then this is not something where it's down to one person in the company that you can hand over all that worry. It's a bit like thinking that it's only the bus driver that matters if that's being chased by a huge robot tiger. Actually, you're all in the bus, you're all going to get slashed by the tiger. And so actually everyone needs to have a commitment to it, because if the company dies, if the company secrets are sold, etc., then yeah, it's bad for everyone. So yeah, this is unfortunately one of those things where it's very difficult to devolve it. It's something where you do need to be involved in it.
Yeah, you're still sharing your screen, by the way, Martin.
And I'm just about to unshare my screen.
I was about to mention the NCSC because they are actually a really good resource. They've got some really nice, well-written and easy to understand stuff, which is one of the things I think that really confuses people when they talk about security.
Yeah, that's why I did the jargon busting. I think that most people can understand what penetration testing is when you imagine there's a tiger outside your car. But if a security guy says penetration testing, I have no idea what he means. If I've never heard the term before, etc. So yeah, clarity, simple analogies, nice metaphors, etc. are good. So yes, any resources that make things more accessible are good, in my opinion.
Yeah, penetration testing tends to be used as like a catch-all term,
Yes.
rather than because I mean, there's like a basic level, just checking how exposed you are is running a vulnerability analysis. That's not necessarily trying to penetrate, try to exploit any security flaws that they find, but just doing an analysis of how exposed you are.
Yeah.
And then penetration testing itself is not necessarily something that companies need to really do. They can hire in. It's more just having a security awareness, maybe it's a security team.
Yeah.
Because I mean, penetration testing can be very expensive. If you're going to do it for the private sector, then you generally have to be CREST certified in the UK, and if you're doing it for the public sector, you have to be Czech certified. And both
Yes.
routes can be very expensive.
Yeah. At least there are things like that. The cybersecurity business is still evolving, and there are now various bits of certification, so on, you can get that do serve as that base level of things. Not that many years ago, there weren't very many things like that at all. So that is getting better.
I'd argue that because it's become a smorgasbord of certifications now. Everyone and their dog is offering you a certification.
Yeah.
The guy that taught me, that trained me in CEH, is now doing his own things that he's put together.
Yeah.
There's like you said, you've got CISSP, which is for managers. You've got companies like Offensive Security, you're doing OSCP. You've got people like Rapid7, they've got their own. There's tons and tons, and
yeah,
when I see CVs, that come across my desk, like there's more certifications I've never heard of.
Yes.
And there's absolutely loads out there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild west at the moment. There's still an evolving marketplace, an evolving environment, but this is how lots of things were, like quality systems, for instance. Before ISO 9000, there were lots of different ways of making sure that you had a decent way of looking after all of those aspects of management and so on. So over time, I'm assuming that there will be a gradual bringing together of things, and that more standards and so on will appear.
Yeah, it's still an evolving industry.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because if we're all running away from a tiger, then there's not very much time to do anything other than run. And so standards are going to be an interesting thing to try and develop when you're busy with an ongoing active threat. So yeah.
So have you got any thoughts on sort of people who sell snake oil, as in tiger repellent gel, and how to filter those out?
Yeah. There's a couple of answers. The first answer is that you should go and first talk to some of the larger multinational established companies who turn up at the cybersecurity exhibitions and so on. In a world where one has exhibitions, although they do have virtual ones as well now. The opposite to that is that very often you'll find that there are small local providers who do this as part of a package that is concerned with GDPR, with quality, etc. So it's one of these things where it's trying to cover all of the angles, particularly for people who are SMEs or startups or something. Getting rid of the snake oil is really learning about what the people who are the good guys say, so that you can detect when people say alarmingly, amazingly over the top, impossible to actually achieve things. So snake oil people always have this thing where theirs is better than everyone else, it's cheaper than everyone else, it does things that break the laws of physics, etc., etc. And so it's one of these things where your standard due diligence, where you talk to a few people and see what they say, the outliers are then reasonably easy to spot. So yeah, There are some people who do that, but luckily there are an awful lot of people who are the exact opposite and who are very knowledgeable, etc., etc. So yeah, there will always be people who sell snake oil.